Welcome to the Arch Africa podcast, a platform that uses the power of storytelling to reimagine the African narrative.
We are Afro-Optimists and deep believers in the African continent, using dialogue to celebrate African excellence, especially that of African women. I am Lorna Okeng.
I am Olga Kiconco.
And we are the builders of Arch Africa.
Hi Lorna, we have introduced ourselves as Afro-Optimists, but what does that mean? And I'm sure you guys have Googled that, so let's help you out.
Oh wow, interesting. I think the notion of Afro-Optimism in its most simple state is to believe, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I think why we call ourselves Afro-Optimists is, honestly, Olga, I think we have been incredibly lucky. I often say we have a front row seat mm-hmm. in this, whether it's called an African Renaissance or the African Rising. It's been spoken about for a very long time, but I think in our line of work, in our lives experiences collectively, we have had the opportunity to really meet African excellence, like firsthand. People who are doing, to be honest, incredible things, and people who are choosing to bet on the abundance of this continent and to believe. I think if you believe, then then you know that there's possibilities, and if you choose to know that there's possibilities, and I think that, to me, in its most basic form is to be an Afro-Optimist, especially for the continent. Yeah. What is your lens in regards to that?
So recently, I started reading a book, Indra Nooyi's autobiography, A Full Life, or My Life in Full. My Life in Full. And in there, she says that with a can-do optimism and a must-do sense of responsibility, we can transform society. And I think something that I've recently noticed is this pattern of like negativity. And I think for so long, there is a number of things that, need to be addressed. But at the same time, two things can be true at the same time, which is live on a continent where like governance and leadership are, I would say, failing us. But on the other side, there is this youthful population. There is a number of women starting to rise up and, transform society. There is this whole cultural experience and identity starting to be unpacked with music, movies, and people taking ownership of their narrative. And I think also starting to realize that no one is coming to save them, but they have to save themselves. And we've as you've said, we've had the opportunity to see it with our own eyes, working in tech and working in the creator economy. So it's very interesting to see how young people are, starting to use their skills for the betterment of society. And there, of course, there's still a lot of work to do, a lot. But I think that sense of pride and Africanness is starting to rise. And another big English word that we like to throw around is the African Renaissance, right? But maybe from a philosophical view, what do you just unpack for us what that means?
I think you said something really profound about trying to, of course, we are a society, and therefore there is the part of the collective, all of us together, the society. There's collective responsibility, but there's also individual responsibility. And going back in time, there's always been, we always say with our forefathers, set the pace. for us and handed over like a mantle for us to move on, to take it forward and pave the way for the next generation. So there's always that element of each generation typically has its mandate. Yeah. But if we go back to, and talking about the Renaissance, if we go back to, let's say the 1960s, when there was a very Pan-African Renaissance. Actually, that was what was happening, especially post the colonial era. It was very strongly themed around, a one Africa. There was that Ubuntu-ness, trying to, kind of break off the shackles of, decades of colonization. Rule. Yes, and I think though our forefathers did their job, we had so many liberation fights across, but we also saw, Pan-African fights, South Africa against the apartheid. So that era, their mandate was mostly political freedom, looking for the liberty of the African child, of the African people as a collective. However, in our day, we are not necessarily, I don't think we are, the kind of liberation our liberation struggle is a bit different. Of course, we recognize that we are a result of, these experiences. But then, like what you said is, there is, for a very long time, Africa's stories have been told by the West or someone else, and also shaped how, we see ourselves. Our identities have strongly been shaped by mostly our, colonial residue. But then now that there's that, as you're saying, it's not coming from outside, it's coming from within. It's like a percolation from within. And again, whether it's the young people, but it's also not, it's hinged on a return to self, a return to self-identity, Africanness, you covered that. And it's saying, regardless of our challenges, what is our biggest asset? And we are going to leverage our greatest assets, whether it's our cultural diversity, our vibrancy, our young people, our tech-savvy people, to use that then as an instrument for liberation. So then this African Renaissance that we are seeing today is we're hearing a lot of soft power culture diplomacy, where we're saying we're using our most beautiful things. Our music is going to travel. It's going to shape. It has traveled. Our fashion
on the streaming platforms.
Our fashion, our music, our film is actually shaping contemporary global culture. And then we're not asking, and we are working with so little. You get, like, it's so little, and we are still, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. And the world is paying attention.
I like what you said about identity, right? And the self. I think everything starts from the self. And, there is, again, with the young population, there's a lot of people who are trying to discover who they are. And I guess also break away from certain scripts that have been written for them because of, age-old, age-old societal norms and systems. But I think with this new sort of identity that's being shaped and formed, I think understanding who you are as an individual and how that resonates, or how that like moves to the next layer, which is, your community, your immediate family, your community, where you work, and the nation overall, right? So just going back to the core of the self and understanding the role that you play as an individual in this wider African Renaissance, right? And trying to shape and mold like what your purpose is. I think personally, I've had a bit of a, not struggle per se, let's say journey, where I've had to learn and unlearn and relearn certain things based off this script that had been written, and following a certain script, and then just going off on a whole different tangent. And then sort of like coming back to the script, I'm like, but no, going off on a tangent again. And I see this amongst like my peers. So many people trying to identify and understand who they are to the core. And define what their why, right? And I would like to like share this journey of also our why and how we arrived at building the Arch brand, right? And how we essentially want to help be that light, as you said, that light that we want to shine. So how did we get here? Building Arch.
I think there's multiple parts, because one, I think there is the buffet, there's the remix of our backgrounds and our various interests. I feel like we are a cocktail of so many things. It depends on which day you meet us. So it's multiple things, but in a world which said you can only be one thing, but we quickly and I think that's why we also strongly gravitated towards each other, is sometimes we've been told identify a car. That we've always said, so many people, when you ask them, tell me about yourself, and say, I'm a banker, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm an engineer, or I'm a doctor, or I'm an MP. But that is kind of what you do, and not necessarily who you are. And I think the battle between finding your individual why and how it then plugs into the bigger, picture, because we are all parts of this whole. It's returning to the self, returning to ourselves, and really understanding that we're going to use so many Bible references, but you are not one. You are anything you can choose to imagine you can potentially be. And there is no start or finish. You should be as fluid as possible, because your why is not necessarily like a stuck career. Your why is how that tiny little part will shift. Move the cheese? So coming back home to Arch, I would say, especially we've known each other for a very, very long time. Very long time.
2 decades.
Yeah, 2 decades. But it's also it's also because we coming back to the why, how we were able to return to the why as people who found themselves as, I don't want to say outliers, or make it appear that we are excessively different. No, it's because I'm going back to we have multiple interests, and we just could not fit in a particular line of work. But because we are diverse, we found ourselves magnets to very many spheres. We then began to reflect on that question of, if we knew then
what we
know now, what would we be doing different? So Arch has been birthed from the learnings on our personal journeys, but also recognizing that you can only appreciate you now when you connect the dots back. All things work together for your good. And that information can be very scarce to find if you're not lucky enough to have a free seat in certain spaces. So I think from my end, that would be one of the core reasons how we arrived to Arch. What are your thoughts?
I think the arrival to Arch and is really based off self-reflection, a lot of self-reflection, and understanding the power of like timing. Is because I go back to that 20 years. That's 20 years. Oh my God, Lorna, we're old.
No.
Okay,
timeless.
We're not old. We're
ageless.
I like that. Timeless is better. Is the when we met in art class in Namagunga, And I think, what was it? You had a pencil called Patalma.
That is still.
And to me, that was like the most.
It was getting me an A. I needed to make sure it was branded.
It had a name, yeah, Patalma, yeah. And then we started calling each other Patalma thereafter. But like, what's very interesting to me is the timeless, like, friendship that we've been able to. When I say sustain, it's almost very corporate, capitalistic. Yeah. Oh yeah. How we've been able to maintain, yeah, because we
have surpassed most relationships. People went for divorces, we are still going.
Okay, that's extreme. But I was going to go with like friendship, but you went straight
because that's why friendship becomes a very powerful part of our journeys that people may not necessarily recognize. Yeah,
very true. And also at the times that those friendships are formed, because like I have a couple of friends that I've known since I was 3 years old, you know, and then a couple of friends from 3 years old all the way through primary school, secondary school, of course uni. We all went different paths, but then I could say in our early 20s came back together. But even in that period of time where we weren't together, it's like nothing ever changed. Of course you jump onto the secondary wagon moving forward. But I think the power of going beyond self now to the other circle, which is the family circle, the community circle, and understanding the power of like building your small, and call it village, and how those people hold you, how you hold each other accountable, how you all want to see each other grow,
each other's keepers,
other's keepers, essentially. And I think that for me was the motivation to just reflect on all these, you know, pieces and say, why don't we start this thing and see where it goes. And, you know, I'm very excited about the possibilities that it's going to unlock. I'm hoping it will ignite more Afro-optimists. We need optimistic people.
More believers. The continent, Uganda needs more believers. Essentially it is looking at you know what you just said, being, you know, looking out for the other, because that's how community is, you know, taking there's a lot of selflessness that goes in building societies, because it's now not about me and my immediate family, and it goes back to core values. And the reality is some of the spaces that we spent a lot of our time in our formative years instilled some of those values that we see today, you know, through knowledge to virtue. There are some, it goes back to first principles of knowing who you are and making sure that you recognize that this life's journey it's not really just for you and your, you know, like 50 by 100 plot and, you know, getting your job and stuff. But no, I hate to use that one, but there's always, I think for my turning point in identifying the responsibility, going back to Indra's thing of the role of the response, knowing the self, but also the collective responsibility. And there is, I think it's Albert Einstein who says that every day, I remind myself that all the privileges that I'm enjoying today, especially like us, first of all, Black people, Ugandan, 2 women, all of the privileges that we are enjoying today are as a result of the blood, sweat, and tears of our forefathers, the men and women who came before, our matriarchs, who people actually shed, you know, laid down their lives for us to enjoy some of the things that we often take for granted. And then he concludes and says, and I must exert myself in equal measure to ensure that I contribute to what I continue to benefit from and what I've always benefited from. So it's our responsibility as like us to pay it forward, make sure that ideally the people born after us should have it better, should not have to struggle with some of the struggles of our time. And remember, the struggles of our time are not even close to the struggles some of the people had, you know, 100 years ago. So 150 years ago,
60 years
60
ago.
years, 40, 30. Some
Yeah.
of these privileges we take for granted are a reminder that actually that we owe it to the generation coming after us to be better. Otherwise, we would have failed them.
Yeah.
So having that at the back of my mind, or actually we are very, very conscious of, it is our responsibility to shape our space, our small little spaces, because it's, if you shape yours,
Yeah.
I shape, we come together, we build, it expands.
Yeah,
and
collective.
that collective, and that
Yeah.
is what, I Am Because We Are was all about. And therefore, that is a very core part of the African rising. It really, really is. And that's really why we're doing what we're doing with Arch Africa. But also building on, going back to recognizing, and actually it's recognizing the role of our forefathers and foremothers. The continent being young, we talk about that quite casually, but there's also a huge what's that statistic? 2%.
Less than, it's like 1.7% over the age
I'm sorry for laughing,
of
but
60. Insane. And yet the median age is the number of people who are above and the number of people are below are the same. It's the same percentage. So the median age of Uganda is about 15.7. And the age above 60 is just 2%.
Yeah.
Less than 2%. It was 1.7. We had to help and round up to 2%.
It's actually it's worrying.
What's the implication of that? What do you think is the implication of this shrinking older population in a very young country?
Yeah, I mean, because this is very fascinating, especially for a continent like ours that has been accused or categorized as you didn't document, you didn't have,
the dark
continent. That's just no information. You guys did not have nothing, right?
But do you remember reading that when you were little, the dark continent, and now when you're older, you're but these guys,
honestly,
really?
Up to today, when I think about the dark, I don't know, my mind. It's a pendulum between. I honestly used to think it's because of the skin color. They're like, oh, maybe it's because as continent which has people with darker skin, or because of the dense tropical rainforests. Because
so
under the things which was really dark, you couldn't move. So in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, you actually couldn't move through some of these super dense forests because under the canopy was so strong that it was kind of black under. So that's honestly my imagination. But to later realize that it's a synonymous to you guys had no civil. There was just nothing happening, which is actually not true.
Of course.
And we have only come to realize it now that some of some of the stories that we have been told and considered as absolute truth are actually contestable now, but it also goes back to, that proverb of the lion, the hunter, until the lion begins to tell its own stories.
The story glorifies the hunter.
Always the hunter. So who are the hunters? Who are the people who are telling our stories? And also the format in which our stories were told. So for us, it wasn't necessarily, the whether it's the audio visual that we have now or the literary works, that, are expected to be put in libraries. Although we do have histories, whether it's Timbuktu and the old Mali Kingdom, where you actually saw that the oldest universities were here and there was science and technology as we see it today done in these universities. But besides that, some of our modes of documentation were mostly intangible. It's in our fashion, it's in our food, in our folklore, in our hair. So because of the way our history was preserved and transferred, we relied on that community. So your grandmother told you stories, or your grandmother over, they call it a fireplace. So
and
now,
a tree,
and a tree. There was
a canopy.
Yes, there was always those bits and pieces. But with urbanization, we have split the the indigenous form of knowledge transfer. Now all of us, you're moving to the cities. They throw you in a town away. You have to move away. We're all, highly kind of, there's this massive exodus to the cities, to the urban spaces. So what that means is that there's a generation that is dying off. When an old man dies, a whole library burns down. There's a generation that is dying off, and that the knowledge, they have collective knowledge from decades and decades and probably centuries that is actually not being passed on. Now the problem is that then we are going to have a cut, and it can go either way, because if you don't know who you are, then anybody else can tell you who you are. And as we go more global facing, where we are a remix of multiple cultures and experience, all those kinds of things, what that means is that
was that half or
no, because because it's those like we can't pretend that we are not interfacing with the rest of the world.
The world is a global village.
It's more now than ever. So the problem now is you need to have a very strong center of grounding, center of gravity, and that is what I fear when you don't know who you are, and who you are is strongly centered around knowing your part of the puzzle in the bigger scheme of things, and that was information that was often passed down. So that is the conundrum that we find ourselves in. And then
but the other thing is also that whole history repeats itself, right? I have this concern that because of what you said, the limited documentation or part of that old cultural identity or knowledge being captured, if it's not captured, chances are we may be staring like maybe 50 years down the line. You're like, hold on, did that thing happen 50 years ago? Right? So I think it also comes down to apart from the part of the, I love what you beautifully said, the old man, when an old man dies, the library burns, but also as Maya Angelou said, that in order for you to know your future, you have to know your past, right? So there's certain things that certain patterns may repeat themselves in the future because we didn't really capture the past. But then also, how do we use those learnings to paint a better world in the future for the generations to come? So I'm really, really excited, guys, to share our labor of love with the matriarchs. These women were born in around 1960 or so, and like they had to break so many barriers, overcome so many societal norms. And they're just like rebels. They're rebels and they're pioneers. They're not, the saying that well-behaved women seldom make history. Like
there is no place for I think the consistent theme is nobody's going to give you freely hand power over to you. Like sometimes we call it false humility, like, I'll wait till, maybe somebody will open the door for me. But in reality, power is often, you'll need to fight for it. And the mode of fighting is different. Some of you, like some of us, the only asset we have, we're not going to
Winnie Mandela vibe, my friend.
We're not some of us are not going to there's multiple ways of fighting, but some of us, the mind has always been a tool to fight back. Literature has always been, the arts have always been a tool to fight back. So the kinds of fights that these women had to do to again push and find themselves in spaces that were not designed for them. We find ourselves today with scenarios such as that, although our fight then becomes different. Because like the Winnie Mandela, she had to literally fight. Literally fight. The suffragettes had to fight for women to vote. People were, you know, demonstrating. But today there's multiple ways to demonstrate, and it's using your gift and advocacy is very different for other people, for different people. But the reality is we all need to recognize that we have a role to play on an individual and a collective level to make sure that this that we really truly see a time where Africa's young people will not wonder why they have, you know, a certain color, or they come from a certain continent,
or why their hair is a certain
or
way.
why their hair is a certain way, or like a young girl wondering, like while we are still very cognizant of, you know, those gender differences and economic differences, but imagine a world where, you know, these young children don't have to wonder why they were born on this continent, or why they had that birth card given to them. And I think for me, if I'm to really just finalize it, is there is I think he was called, there's a Ghanaian novelist who wrote a book called The Beautiful Ones Have Not Been Born Yet. And it was like in the 1960s. So he was saying that he was alluding to a world where the African child is born in a corrupt free world, in a world where, you know, so for them they're beautiful, like, you know, they have that, so they are not restless, because we are still restless, because there's so much we still need to do. But then we really hope we contribute to, you know, the world where the restful ones will be born, where honestly their struggle is not, you know, the kind of struggles that we're seeing today. So I think that is a foundation of Africa that, you know, looking back 100 years into the future, I think people watch back, I would want to see the young girls and young boys of African descent say they are restful.
And they're free.
And they're free. So
that's
it.
So it's amazing how, you know, the number of themes we've unpacked through this engagement. If you guys, you should be a fly on the wall when me, Lorna, and I are having our random conversations. But I think what we want to do, how we want to contribute to this African Renaissance and the movement that's coming up is under the Arch Africa brand. We are essentially offering 3 ways that we want to engage, you know, people, Afro-Optimists. It's through the content. So we have our podcast, and then we are going to do a bit of coaching for a number of Afro-Optimists as well, especially with that, you know, them unpacking who they are and how who they are resonates to building a better future. So stuff to do with your personal growth, your professional development, you know, managing your money, that money you have to manage.
So the more economic liberation we have, especially for women, that is a core ingredient in actualizing this true Africa we want.
And
community
as well, because we're very, you know, we're a product of community. Sometimes it's me and Lorna alone community, and would like to share this platform, sharing this platform with people that have, it's really more values aligned. So values being mutual trust, values being, you know, integrity, values being accountability and transparency. You know, all these things that we want to see for the broader, bigger picture. We want to, you know, walk on this journey with you in order to build that out. So
and honestly, being each of again really grounded on I am my sister's keeper. That life is fascinating sometimes. That it's sometimes not necessarily it's not by power, it's not by might, you know, but there's time and chance happens to all of us. So there's a very central role destiny helpers have. And most of those things you do not know. I'm a believer that there are certain people who have keys to open certain doors for you, or you have doors and somebody has the keys, or you have keys but somebody has the door. So those that maze of figuring out who your door openers and key holders are is very, very instrumental. And that's, for me, the power of community, is that you meet, to be honest, we've met people who have opened doors for us that we cannot say it was because of, you know, our bios or anything. It was sheer alignment of beyond human, it's effort. Like, you can't, because there are so many great people in the world. But also, that to me is why I really celebrate community. As you said, we are a product of community. We are a product of multiple destiny help. Olga is you're one of my destiny helpers. Have I ever said that to you? You can cry now.
You said it with your full chest. Say it again.
I mean, I'll never say it again. You'll never hear it again. But yeah, so that is I think that is Arch Africa. So join us as we
figure
life
out
together.
Life out with you. Yeah.
Okay.
Join our movement by subscribing here
and following us on our social channels at ArchX Africa.